So I'm going to use the same data. So I'm going to assume that I have 250 in my temporary current assets and 250 in my permanent current assets and 100,000 in my plant and equipment. So I'm still going to use the 600,000 of total asset. But I'm going to change the assumption of how they're being financed. So my temporary current assets and my permanent current assets, so these two, let's just pretend 30% of that is financed with short-term debt. And then we'll leave this one the same, where all of the plant and equipment is financed with long-term debt. Okay, so when I'm trying to figure out the interest rate or the interest expense that we've had to pay, then I'll just start with the plant and equipment. So none is going to be financed with short term and all of it is going to be financed with long term. And then if I take 30%, so 250,000 times 0.3, that will give me 75,000 of the 250 is financed with short term. And so then if I just subtract that, so take 250 minus 75, then that means the remaining, or 70%, is financed with long-term debt. And I'll do the same thing down here. I'll take my permanent current assets and multiply that by 0.3, and that gives me 75,000. And then 250 minus 75 is 175. So what I'm just trying to make sure is that the long-term and short-term equals the total assets. And we'll do it down as well. So 75 plus 75 plus 0 is 150. And 175, 175, and 100 is 450. Okay, and the reason why we're calling this a conservative approach is because the majority of the assets are being financed with long-term debt. So I already know, because my long-term interest rate is higher, it's a little bit more stable over time. So although I'm going to be paying a higher interest expense, I'm sacrificing my interest because I know that it's stable. So I'm willing to pay a little bit more higher of an interest rate by financing that this way. Okay, so now if I take 150 times 6%, that gives me 9,000. And 450 times 10%, that gives me 45,000. So in total, my interest equals 54,000. So that's my total interest expense. So I'm just going to compare it to the last question that we did, which was the aggressive approach. So I'm going to assume we still have the same amount of earnings before interest and taxes. Now I'm going to move this interest expense down here. Because it's financed with long-term debt, you can see the interest rate is actually higher than the interest expense from the aggressive plan. And so if I take 200 minus 54, that means because I'm paying more interest, I have less left over than from the aggressive approach. And I'm going to pay 50% tax on the 146. So I'll take 146 times 50%. So that gives me 73, and then that leaves me with 73,000 at the end, okay? So the only differences between these two approaches is the interest, okay? So if you're paying more interest, you're paying less tax, okay? But at the end, you're going to have less of your earnings left over.